Hello, and welcome to this Orthodontic Products webinar. I am Allison Warner, Chief Editor of Orthodontic Products. Today, we're going to be talking about an interesting transition model for your practice. Let's face it, these days, disruptions are constant, prompting orthodontists like you to explore your best path forward. So with that in mind, Dr. Greg White, President and CEO of PepperPointe Partnerships, and Julie Boer, Chief Strategy Officer at PepperPointe Partnerships, are with us to help you not only understand the current market disruptions impacting practice owners like yourself, but also help you understand how private equity investments have changed practice valuations and dentistry in general, but orthodontics specifically. And they are also going to explain the PepperPointe Partnerships transition model and help you understand that the after retirement passive income component of this unique transition model. Now, before we get started, some housekeeping. First, this webinar will be available on demand after the live viewing, so please feel free to rewatch or tell your colleagues about it. They will be able to check it out then. Second, if you have any technical difficulties, keep in mind this is available on demand for viewing after the live airing. And third, if you have any questions, we will be doing a Q&A after the presentation. So please post your questions in the little questions box on your panel there, and we will get to as many as we can at the end. Now, let me introduce Dr. White and Julie Boer. Dr. White is one of the founding partners of White, Greer, and Maggard Orthodontics, formed in 1991 and currently part of the largest privately owned pediatric and orthodontic group practices in the country. He has been actively practicing orthodontics for more than 25 years, and he co-founded the company that invented, produced, and sold what is still the world's top-selling custom breast prosthesis for post-mastectomy breast cancer survivors. So in other news, Dr. White serves as the president and CEO of PepperPointe Partnerships, which currently serves more than 100 dental locations and more than 130 doctors. Now, for Julie, as I said, she is the Chief Strategy Officer at PepperPointe Partnerships. She has more than 13 years of experience in brand management, public relations, and marketing communications, working with corporate and brand leaders to create platforms, programs, and partnerships to deliver on the company's purpose and make a positive impact in the world. She has been the driving force in PepperPointe's growth, providing leadership in strategy and business development. She led the formation of PepperPointe's two group of practices in 2019 and 2020, helping to ensure the preservation of doctor ownership, practice legacies, and thriving cultures. Dr. White and Julie, it's great to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, Allison. I really appreciate it. And thank all of you all out there for joining us this afternoon. You don't have to have been around orthodontics for many years to realize how fast things are changing. And Mark Twain is credited as having said that everybody complains about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. And so that's kind of what we've seen in orthodontics as well, as these rapid changes have been taking place. I can remember being asked to be on the Global Strategic Planning Committee for the AAO back in 2017. I was in St. Louis there at the time for that meeting, and question was asked of everybody in the room: if you could tell all of your colleagues one thing, what would it be? And when it came my time, I said that I would tell them that the future of our profession is still in our hands, but only for a very short time. And I still believe that. I do believe that that time is getting much shorter. And I would have never anticipated back in 2017 how many changes could have taken place in that short 5-year span. It's been truly incredible. So many orthodontic practices over the years, and I've practiced for nearly 30 years, we had a history as orthodontists in our communities. Our name was on the line. It was on the building. It was at stake every single time, every decision we made. Our reputations were. There was a commitment to community. There was a commitment to the patient. There was a commitment to the other colleagues in and around town. And there was an accountability that resulted. And I think that the big part of that was because of the doctor ownership and what they did and how they performed and the experiences that they provide and the quality of treatment that they provided. Really, their name was at stake every single time and every single day. So some of the threats to what was built over all of those years, we've seen directly. We've seen some of them have been around a long time that have accelerated, such as direct-to-consumer companies with clear aligner therapy, the modality changing and shifting ever more toward that modality and away from brackets and bands. Changing patient expectations. That iPhone or that smartphone that we carry in our pocket, used to patients would they would make decisions based upon what their dentist told them, or maybe their closest 2 or 3 friends. Now they don't think about that so much. They consult their 450 closest friends on Facebook or Instagram, and based upon the Google reviews, that's how they make their decision. So the changing expectations, not just from the way that they make decisions based upon the changing marketplace, but also the demands. You know, everything has to be immediate. Think about how many of you guys are going to, ladies and gentlemen, are going to show up today to your houses and there's going to be a box from Amazon sitting there. That would have never happened 5 years ago. We went out and got what we wanted. Now we're influenced so much by what feeds we're scrolling through and then making those decisions, and it shows up the next day. People expect that same sort of immediacy in their orthodontic care and in the type of experience that they have. I've owned more than a dozen restaurants over the years, and it was amazing to me over that 25 years that I had those restaurants, how things changed from a consumer standpoint and what those expectations were. In the early days, they just wanted a good, clean meal and a clean restroom in the place. Later on, it got to be, I needed gluten-free, I needed local, I needed free range, I needed inexpensive. And I'm like, you know, pick 2, but my gosh. And so it's becoming more and more difficult to meet with those changing expectations of the patients. And then obviously COVID has had its effect, but the biggest effects, along with the COVID-19 impact, have been the student loans and the debt explosion as a result of the explosion of the cost of dental education. So we'll take that one first. The average orthodontic resident debt has increased by more than $100,000 in just the last 5 years. You know, I'm ancient, but when I got out of school, my entire cost of my education, college, dental school, ortho, was less than $50,000. It's more than twice that in just the last 5 years in terms of the increase for these kids. Is there $500,000 in debt getting out of school is not unrealistic for them. Secondly, the COVID effect, the great resignation that we've seen. If you're like me, you've seen this in your staffing. It's more and more difficult to find people, and it's getting harder and harder to retain them without it really affecting your P&L. And then the highest inflation rates that we've seen in 40 years, along with the supply chain issues of getting what we need when we need it in order to continue taking care of the patients that we do see. And then the biggest change has certainly been the private equity's entrance into dentistry through the dental service organizations. I was speaking at the winter meeting of the AEO, and there were several speakers in front of me, and then we had a panel later that day, and one of the key features that they kept talking about is, don't worry about this. This is not going to be total consolidation. We don't anticipate more than 40 or 50% of orthodontics consolidating when this is all said and done. Well, that's probably true. It's probably only going to be about 45 or 50%, but that 45 or 50% is going to represent 100% of the ones that they deem of any value. So don't get lost in that. They're not even entertaining practices that are less than $1 million, less than $1 million in net collections, and that number gets much closer to the 1.5. They're looking to purchase EBITDA, and they've changed the valuations, which has caused them to be able to get 35% market penetration in general dentistry, going from 19% at the end of 19 to 35% by the end of 2021. Ortho was at 2% going at the end of 19 and had expanded to 8 to 10% total consolidation by the end of 21, and that number is expected to triple over the course of the next 36 to 48 months. That's going to have a tremendous impact.
Not to mention where people want to live. The amount of penetration is going to be in only areas where you're going to be able to recruit doctors for the next generation.
Yeah, that is true. The primary dental service organizations, they're looking for practices that have the high EBITDA, that also are in locations that are going to be easy to recruit to. So who does that hurt the most? It hurts the most underserved rural areas. So here's the way that the change in valuations have occurred. On this chart here, you can see the traditional value of a practice. Let's take a $1.5 million practice that has a 55% overhead. Cash flow on it, $675,000. So the typical way of looking at that is, okay, when this doctor retires, how much is it going to cost to replace them from somebody coming out of school, and going rates around $300,000. So that leaves $375. If you apply traditional 3x multiple to EBITDA, that practice would be worth $1.1 million, which is roughly 75% of the net collections of that practice. As private equity enters into it, they're able to pay a higher multiple on it. So you go through the same math, but you multiply it by 5x, and it comes out to $1.875 million. So if you're getting ready to retire, and this is your last big paycheck, which one are you going to take? Are you going to take the $1.9 million, or are you going to finance a kid that has $500,000 of debt and pay them and receive 1.1 from them? Question really is answered on its face value. You're going to take the majority of people will take the money. So back in 2018, we had 19 locations here in Central Kentucky, all orthodontic, under the name White Bear Maggard. And I started exploring what the options were and what this really looked like from a private equity standpoint, dealing with them directly or indirectly through a DSO. I owed it to my partners, who ranged anywhere from 35 years of age to 65 years of age, to explore what this was. If there's so many people that are moving into this model, there must be something incredibly compelling about it. So as I looked at it, this is the basic structure here on the left. You have the dental practice that is purchased by the dental service organization from money that is provided by the private equity firm, and that money, where that private equity money comes from, is from institutional investors or family funds or whatever. The institutional investors are anticipating and expecting a 16 to 18% return. Private equity is the matchmaker in this, and they're going to get their piece, and then obviously the DSO has expenses that they have to cover. As I looked at that, I realized that the only one that's actually generating any money out of that is the dental practice. And so I'm like, wow, right now all of that money comes from the practitioner, and after overhead, they keep it all. So if they're going to pay that multiple, what does that really look like? So as I did the math on it, and I took a look at that 5x multiple that they're paying, and realized that what they're doing is paying a certain percentage of it in cash and the rest of it in stock, what they're really doing is providing a cash advance. So this doctor, who used to make we'll call it $700,000 a year, is now going to work for the next 4 years for $300,000 a year, and they're going to get a multiple of that $400,000 in some form, either cash or stock. And that $400,000 being the difference between the $700,000 they used to take home and the $300,000 that they're going to take home for the next 4 years. So I thought, well, why wouldn't you just borrow the money from the bank? You could borrow that same amount of money, $400,000 times 5, $2 million from a bank, cut your own pay, and then pay it back over the course of the next 4 years. And at the end of the 4 years, you got your $2 million, your income goes back up to the $700,000, and you still got your practice. So the cash advance, what you're doing is getting that 4 years in advance, and at the end of that 4 years, you're still making the $300,000. So you've taken a big cut in pay, and you don't have your practice anymore. So the value proposition is, here's the value of your practice, and here's the way we're going to pay it to you. We're going to pay it to you in a check, in a new and greatly reduced income, and in some stock. So over the next 4 years, when you're working for the practice that you used to own, go out and say some really good things about it so that other people will do the same, and now you can cash in on your stock and maybe get a second big hit. So that's the way it looked to me, and I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense financially, certainly doesn't fit within the core values of who we are and what we're trying to do, by always viewing things and every decision through what's in the best interest of my patients. So at the collision of excellence and expediency that we talked about, excellence being what we have built over all of those years by pouring our hearts and soul and time into something that we have built, now all of a sudden transfers over to ownership by someone that's not a dentist. And I'm not talking about ownership of the practice, because you'll hear DSOs talk about how the doctors are still owning it. They do own two things. They get to do the work, and they get all the liability associated with anything that goes wrong. What they don't own is the profits of the practice. So yes, you do own the bad part, and you don't own the good part. So where does that leave us? You have solo practices that are either going to be successful and profitable and desirable, and most people will sell that to private equity backed DSOs. The ones that aren't as successful will either scramble to find an associate or they will close their doors. So what does that look like to scramble to find an associate? Well, if you've got an $800,000 practice and you're cash flowing $300,000 a year, why would anybody come and buy your practice for $300,000 when they don't have to pay anything and they can go and work for a DSO for $300,000 a year with no investment at all? So the group practices, these are the ones that are, many of them are trying to get a high enough EBITDA to be able to sell, and the DSOs that are simply going to turn every 3 to 5 years and sell majority interest in their DSO to the next PE group that's invested in them, as the original people have, and original investors have what they call an equity event. The thing that's interesting about all three of those scenarios is none of those practices will ever be owned by a doctor again. The solo practices will either close or they will sell. The group practices will likely sell, and the DSOs are already out of the hands of the owning doctors. Next, please. So this isn't really theory. We've seen it happen. Let's take a look at medicine, take a look at pharmacy. I remember when you selected a physician in the same way that you do a doctor. You looked in the yellow pages back in the day, and there's one on every corner. They cared. You knew what their phone numbers were at home. You could get a hold of them. Your pharmacist, you knew who they were. I have no idea who has the shift right now at Walgreens. I have no idea who the people are that work for Central Baptist here locally as the doctors. My insurance company will tell me if I ever need them. So it's not a stretch to believe that dentistry is not going to head in that same direction. It's truly having your head in the sand if you don't see it already. And the reason for it is always the same. It's money. No consolidation ever occurs in any industry without the complicity of the people in that industry. Medicine is the way it is, not because the big bad wolves came knocking at the door. It's because the lambs gave themselves up to slaughter. The same thing happened in medicine as pharmacy, and it's happening right now in dentistry. So we took a little different approach to it. I didn't like the idea of going it alone. Seemed very difficult proposition to continue to fight, even as large as we were. It was going to be very difficult long term to be able to have any sort of negotiating power with third-party payers. We certainly were going to become last in line when it came to the vendors and the suppliers. Many of you probably know this already as you're going through COVID and you tried to get dental chairs or x-rays and you probably couldn't get them. Well, you know who got them? The big guys got them. That's where they went. And that's going to continue to go that direction more quickly. So given the fact that I didn't really like the financial side of selling to a DSO, nor did I like the core value aspect of it, nor do I like the idea of seeing the death by 1,000 paper cuts of staying alone, we decided to go to our colleagues and reach out to them to see if they maybe were thinking like we were. And one of the things I had to ask myself and ask them, are there any orthodontists or pediatric dentists out there that have been in practice for 5, 10, 15 years that are starving, that need this money, that need this DSO money so badly that they have to take this deal? And you know what? They all seem to be doing quite well. They're all making really good livings. And so I asked them, well, why in the world are some of your colleagues selling their practices to DSOs, taking the cash advance and then giving up their practice and their future income? They said, well, a lot of them are doing it just because other people are doing it. Some are afraid. And then all of the media out here associated with, oh, if you don't get it now, you're never getting these valuations again. When Biden takes office, you're going to go to 39.6% capital gains. You better get that going. So I started thinking about that. Who are these people that are sending this message out? And you know what? Every one of those people have something to gain from it. They have something to gain from you selling your practice to a DSO, and the DSO has something to gain from you selling it to them because they're getting returns on something that you've spent a lifetime building. So I thought, well, if these guys do not need the money, they're not strapped for cash right now, then what is it that they really need? And so I asked them, and they said, well, we just would like some protection from the disruptions are out there. We'd like to know that our income is going to continue to go up and not down with the same level of effort. We would like to have an exit strategy. We just basically want to build a wall of protection around ourselves. So I thought that's really interesting. How could you do that? So I started looking back at the flow chart of this DSO structure, private equity structure, and I realized that if you don't need the money right now, then you don't need the institutional investors. And if you don't need the institutional investors, you don't need the matchmakers, which is the PE group. If you don't need them and their hands aren't in the cookie jar, then that means that money gets to stay in for the people who are actually generating the income, the doctors. So in 2019, we decided that the best way of doing this was to self-consolidate. But there was one issue associated with self-consolidation. It's one thing to run one practice or two practices or even 20 in our case, but how do you run 50 offices or 70 offices? Well, fortunately, we had built a back office for Whiteger-Maggard, and it was a location named PepperPointe. PepperPointe was not a company. It was a location that handled all of the back office functions for Whiteger-Maggard, such as the HR, Employee Benefits Administration, marketing, all HR aspects, the financial piece, the operations piece. So basically what it was doing for Whiteger-Maggard Orthodontics, it was actually fulfilling the roles that DSOs fulfill for companies that they have bought and that they own. So I thought, you know what, we need to scale this up. If we can scale this to be able to go from the 20 to 50 to 100 to 200 to 300 offices that it can take care of, then we can consolidate our folks here in our region in central Kentucky, turn PepperPointe into its own company, its own DSO, with one very big distinction. That DSO will be owned by all of the doctors that participated in the consolidation. And so on August 3rd of 2019, 20 independent practices, 16 pedo and 4 ortho, 50 locations, all came together to form one group practice without any money changing hands. And the public never even knew it occurred because everybody still practiced the next day under their same name in the same locations with the exact same people. That practice started out at $53 million and has gone from $53 million to $70 million in the last 36 months, has gone from $20 million of profitability to $28 million in profitability without any one of those doctors working one day longer or more than they were before. But together, we needed an additional 20 associate doctors who came in, and part of our model and our operating agreement was set up so that when any one of those founding doctors retire, they pass that ownership to the next generation of doctors, and those associate doctors, now partners, share in the profits of the group practice and get to take advantage of the increased reimbursement from the third-party payers and the savings from the vendors and the growth outside of their walls as we're able to expand into more and more locations. Well, that worked out so well that I had the general dentist in the area come to me and said, hey, we'd like to do the same thing. So we set up the exact same structure for them in October of 2020, 37 practices, 42 locations, 47 partners. And then New York, Western New York came to me and said, hey, can we do the same thing? So on August 1st of this year, we had 10 different 8 practices, 20 locations, and 10 doctors. And then the same thing is getting ready to happen here in 4 weeks in Virginia. So the unique characteristic of this is that the doctors not only own the practice, but they control the group practice and the DSO. They own and control the DSO. They control the sale of it, or the never selling of it. They sit on the board, not a clinical board that doesn't make the real decisions, but the people that make the decisions about the practice. It's created a collaborative doctor network where instead of seeing one another as competitors, they see one another as partners. It has ensured that the doctors completely treat patients the way they always have, where they are, with whom, and under the same name. There's a known exit plan. As they get ready to retire, they sell their ownership back to the group practice, and then that passes along to the next generation of doctors. It reconstitutes the old transition model, but in a way that functions in today's marketplace. And they continue to increase their income from the day it forms all the way through to up till retirement. That income increases without them working one day more. And here is a major piece of it. There's always been a question that has been asked from every dentist that I've ever known. How can I maintain my lifestyle in retirement? By them owning their own DSO when they sell their piece to the group practice that goes to the next associate doctor. They do not sell their piece of the DSO that they own, and they continue to receive 6-figure passive income in retirement in perpetuity that is passed along to their heirs. So what we really found was that we are in fact stronger together, that we do in fact control our own destiny if only we have the vision and the courage to see it through. And so that's what I ask folks, everybody has to take a look at what am I looking for, what is my exit plan, and what do I want my legacy to be? And each person has to come to grips with that answer, and they have to come to grips with the consequences of that decision. So, 27 minutes. Julie, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, more than anything, our hope for today was that we could relay a message we believe strongly, and that there's more than 2 options out there. There's more than just selling or closing. There's another way to kind of reimagine the future for your career and the legacy of your practice. And what we have done can be replicated. Thinking about group practice differently, thinking about doctor ownership differently. That's kind of our main goal of today. And then secondarily, we really want to kind of share our experience as we pursued and explored a traditional DSO, what we learned, and what we kind of ultimately decided wasn't for us, and I guess why. So would love to kind of open it up for questions and see if we can answer any others that folks might have out there.
Yeah, okay. Well, so a reminder, if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the little questions box on your control panel there. But I do have a first question. Can you share more about the exit strategy and the opportunity PepperPointe has created for associate doctors?
Yeah, so I'll give you a real example. So we had one doctor that was part of the founding group, Dr. Jeff Johnson, and Dr. Johnson was a pediatric dentist in Danville, Kentucky, which is about 40 minutes south of where I'm sitting here in Lexington. And he had an opportunity to take over the program director role in the pediatric dental program at Louisiana State University in New Orleans. So he came to me and said, Greg, I'm wanting to go ahead and exercise my my option to sell my portion of the group practice. So the group paid him, wrote him a check based upon the formula of how that valuation is determined, and then the group then redeemed that stock from him. There was an associate doctor that was already in the wings that then took his place from a clinical standpoint. From where he left, this person went in, but that ownership went to a doctor that was 70 miles away. because that associate doctor who worked in another pediatric dental practice 70 miles away, the board of the group practice, those doctors had determined that that person should be next to take partnership. So she then bought for a 3.5 multiple the old traditional value that we were able to facilitate for her, and she now not only takes on base compensation, but takes on a share of the profit of the overall group. Dr. Johnson moved to New Orleans, where he invested the check that he got from the group, and he continues to receive quarterly distributions from the DSO. That's the first time that it happened. We've had 2 other doctors that have retired and 4 other associates who have become partners since then. And so what it allows us to be able to do is where the DSOs can only offer in that 300,000 range, 350 range for their associate doctors, these partner doctors, orthodontists and pediatric dentists, are getting in the $500,000 and $600,000 range as partners here.
Not to mention their ability to make decisions.
Yeah, plus they're making the decisions, and that number will just continue to climb as the profitabilities continue to grow. So it is a true transition of ownership from one generation to the next. Dr. Johnson received his value of the overall, his piece of the company in 2 different pieces, one in continued passive income and one in a check. Those 2 combined add up to about an 8.5 multiple.
Okay. All right. So second question, and I'm probably not going to say this right, so bear with me. There's a lot of talk about multiples offered to colleagues. What does that multiple really mean? And can you share more about how PE, so private equity, thinks about EBITDA? EBITDA?
Yep.
Okay.
EBITDA. So yeah, here's the way it works, and it's pretty simple, really, the way they look at it. So a DSO will come to your practice and say, okay, Dr. Jones, you have a very nice orthodontic practice. You're generating $2.5 million a year. You're doing it at a 50% overhead. You are profitable to the tune of $1.25 million a year. It's going to cost us about $325,000 to bring somebody in here to replace what you're doing. We want that person to be you for the next 4 years. We want you to keep doing exactly what you've been doing, but instead of taking home $1,125,000 a year, we want you to take home $325,000 a year. But you got to keep getting the same results. So the difference in that, what you used to make and what you're going to make, is $800,000. We're going to apply a 5 multiple to that. We're going to value your practice at $4 million. We're going to give you $3 million of that in a check, and we're going to give you $1 million of it in stock. So you're going to work for the next 4 years for $325,000. Now that's a tough pill to swallow. So every day you got to get up and you got to check your bank balance to make sure that that $3 million is still in there, so that you can gather up the energy to do for $325,000 the exact same job that you used to do for $1.25 million. Now that's where I was going into. At the end of that 4-year period, your hope is that that $1 million that is invested in the stock is going to be worth a lot of money. You have no idea what it's going to be worth, and you have no control over what that is. That's completely out of your control. Now, a lot of DSOs will put a big number on that, 4 or 5 million. I would suggest you get that in a guarantee. You're not going to get it, okay? All you're going to get for sure is $3 million in that situation, a $325,000 a year job, and a stock certificate. And if you don't maintain that same level of profitability, they're going to come back after some of that $3 million.
Okay.
At the DSO leadership, you were on a panel, and one of the panelists was talking about the multiples everyone was throwing around, and it was like, well, is it 7 multiple of what?
Yeah.
And about how different that can look for the practices, and how different those numbers really can be as it relates to the check. Can you kind of share any? Yeah,
I'm not just giving my idea of what it's like to deal with private equity or DSOs. I went all the way down to within 2 weeks of closing with a private equity company that started out at a 12 multiple, but by the time it got down to the end of it, it was a 7 multiple. Now, and that 7 multiple was based upon what they decided the profitability was, not what I decided it was. And then they would come in and ding it more and more and say, okay, we've got to put more money in for accounting to regulate and to monitor what you're doing. So we're going to hire somebody for $200,000 in our firm to do that. And so that $200,000 is coming off your profit. Well, $200,000 on the 7 multiple, you just took $1.4 million of the value out of my practice to hire somebody to monitor me. So I never intended to close with them. I just wanted to know what it was like to go through the entire dating process and then to not show up at the altar. And believe me, I liked it better over in the vestry.
Well, okay, so given the fact that you've actually gone through some of the these processes, I think this question is good then. Can you share again the questions you and your partners asked yourselves when exploring your options? Like, what were the actual things you discussed?
So the first question is always, you're looking at your retirement. What's my path forward personally? Everything always starts, personally, right? What's in it for me? What does this look like for me? I've got to, update my will. I've got to do this. When am I going to be able to retire? Where am I going to retire? So that's what you first start looking at. Then you start looking at, okay, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Because every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, whether it's time commitment or money commitment or whatever. And so ultimately, what my partners and I decided is, if we say yes to the money, we're saying no to everything that we've ever said that we believed in. That every single decision is through the lens of what's in the best interest of the patient. How is turning this practice over that we put our life into to someone that we don't know, to people who will replace us that we don't know, who will not commit to the community the way that we have because they won't have the ability nor the desire nor the motivation to do that. So we're ultimately going to say everything that we ever said in the past was not true. What we should have said is we always view everything through the lens of what's in the best interest of the patient, unless it's not in my best interest. I did not want, nor did my partners want, our last decision to be our worst decision.
Okay. I have a question. When you're sitting down and talking to potential partners, what's the one question you wish they would ask?
So if somebody is approaching me and they're asking about our model, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
What question?
What do you wish they would ask you to know that it's the right decision for them?
I think I would want them to ask me, would you do this over again? Everything that you know about this, now that you're 4 years into this, would you do this again with your practice? Because you have to realize I was the first one in, okay? Mm-hmm. My practice that was the first one that went into this, we're not suggesting that anyone even consider doing something that we hadn't already done first. We did it without any idea how shallow the pool was, okay? But we believed in it so much, and that's what I would want them to ask. Would you do it again? Can you honestly tell me that given your experience with this, would you do this over again? And the answer is yes. And then the follow-up is why? Why is because as much as I love practicing orthodontics for 30 years, my impact was on one patient at a time there. The people who get involved in this, they are exponentially increasing their impact, not one person at a time, but one community at a time, because we, unlike DSOs, we view things in terms of 3 to 5 generations, not 3 to 5 years.
Okay. Great answer. Well, I think with that, we will end this. But Dr. White and Julie, thank you so much for joining us. And if people have any questions or want to follow up with you, where can they contact you? Oh, there we go.
I would love for you to check out our website. And then you are also more than welcome to email Dr. White or myself or give us a call. We've also got a YouTube page with some great videos we encourage you to check out, and a LinkedIn page with lots of great stories and quotes and links that we'd love for you to check out as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much again. And to our audience, remember this webinar will be available on demand, so please feel free to rewatch or to pass it along to colleagues who might be interested. And in the meantime, to keep up with the latest orthodontic industry news, check out orthodonticproductsonline.com. And until next time, take care. Thanks.
Thanks,
so
Allison.
much.
Okay.